Matthew Dunn, host of The Future of Email Marketing, and I'm delighted finally to have as my guest today Chris Marriott, who is the president and founder of Email Connect. Chris, welcome. It's so nice to get you live and one-to-one on this conversation.
It's great to be here, and thank you for your patience with my continued postponement of this. So it is great to finally be here.
You know, is it easier or harder, pandemic, everyone working from whatever, to arrange stuff like this? It seems like logistics are harder than they used to be when everyone was in an office. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I think the biggest change for me has been my willingness to use video calls now.
Oh, really? Were you less so before?
Oh, I never did.
Interesting.
Absolutely had never done a video. I hated Skype. My company, for my company, we used, I can't even remember. But a file sharing,
WebEx,
sharing,
stuff like that.
Yeah, but without, they didn't have any video capabilities. But a month into the pandemic and everyone working from home, I dropped that account and got a Zoom account, and now I'm very comfortable. Now it almost feels weird. And I know this is the future of email, not the future of video conferencing, but now it almost feels weird to have just a phone conversation with somebody.
Interesting. I was chatting with who was I chatting? My sister, and she said, you know what? I still prefer phone calls, and I said, I get that. There's distractions, and maybe that's if you know someone that well.
Right.
I meant to say though, and especially for people who are listening who don't get to watch us hand wave and make faces and stuff like that. I've had the privilege of seeing Chris live a few times at conferences, and while he's great on video, there's definitely a live thing that's fantastic as well. Do you miss that?
I do. That is, because I've done some virtual conference presentations over the years, the past years, and got, excuse me, a couple coming up. But I mean, it's a cliche, but that doesn't mean it's not true. You connect with your audience, whether you're playing music or whether you're speaking, and you feed off that energy, and you just can't, speaking to 100 disconnected people that are out in the ether, it just doesn't. Yeah, I do miss it, and that's one thing I will be most happy to get back to when this is all over.
Yeah, get back to when you go back, and we'll get to email one of these minutes. But when you go back, do you think you'll keep doing more video conferencing than you did before?
Oh yeah, I will never. I mean, one of the things I like about it is, as I move my hands around on the video, is there's nothing on my head, there's nothing in my hands. And so holding a phone now just seems very onerous, and even putting in an earpiece. Anytime somebody calls and I'm scrambling to get either the Bluetooth in or the landline in, half the time people have hung up before I do that, and before I get that in and get everything set up. So I think video conferencing is, for me at least, is here for good. And again, I think it's a good thing. I think people have gotten used to it, and it is nice to see who you're talking to.
Yes. And the EQ definitely has a whole bunch of additional stuff to work with, and you can see someone's face, gestures, expression, and stuff like that. The thing that I've noticed about phone calls, I mean, it's probably true before, but it's more true now that video conferencing is so prevalent, is when someone calls, I'm with you, holding it up to my ear just seems exhausting, but I end up pacing around when I'm on the phone, because they don't have that, I don't have that engagement channel of the face-to-face that we're getting on Zoom and things like that.
That's a great observation, because I'm sort of the same. When I'm on the cell, I'll put the cell in my pocket and walk around.
Right.
And you're right. You can't do that when you're on a video call. I mean, not unless you have a camera crew behind you.
Which back to can't wait to get back on stage. I have to say, the thing that irks me about video conferencing, it's fine. I've got my butt in a Herman Miller chair. I'm all comfortable, but it doesn't have the same energy as when you're standing on stage with a live audience. And I pace on stage, but the engagement is definitely different. It's sort of more focused and frontal and stuff like that.
Yep.
You know, the shared physical reference in the room and stuff like that. Anyway, well, I'm sure you're rocking video conference. I didn't mention it. I should have mentioned it up front, but Chris and his partner Paul have a fantastic and log running podcast called Email Geeks Drinking Coffee. Who's your latest guest on that, by the way?
Next week we have Tim Watson.
Oh, terrific.
From the UK. And this week we had Samantha, I'm going to pronounce her last name correct, Samantha Iodice. This season,
I've got Samantha coming on in a week or two. Yay.
There you go. I mean, she's a great guest. And this season, and I love the pretense of seasons, but nevertheless, this season, which is season 5, we've been focusing on, we kind of went back to our roots because, as you said, it's Email Geeks. It's actually Email Geeks at home drinking coffee.
At home drinking coffee, that's true.
We have to change that eventually, but when everybody's back at work. But we early on in very quickly got a little bored of talking about email every week, and so we branched out and started to, we talked to authors and people who created shows on Netflix and CEOs, and loved that. And then we felt, though, this season we said we need to kind of return to our roots, because there is, particularly because there's not a archive of email historical knowledge. I mean, you and I have been in the business a while, or around the business a while. At least I have. And there's such turnover, particularly on the brand side of people who are doing email marketing, that there's a whole bunch of knowledge about where we came from as an industry that is retiring or moving on, and so we call this season the Founders Series.
Nice.
Because we really and we sort of said to ourselves, if we're not going to talk to anybody who hasn't been in email marketing since before 2010, because we wanted to get people's perspective on what's changed, and so that at least we have in a small way some archive of people. We had Lauren McDonald on, who's not even in email any longer.
Right.
But who again, who's one of the guys that have been around forever, and so we feel good that we've been capturing some of those stories and perspectives on an industry that people who are just getting into it today, or who have gotten into it in the past 5 years even, have no idea from what humble roots this industry rose.
Well, you gave me the perfect segue there to ask about your path into email in email marketing as an industry.
That's an interesting story. And I always joke, if anyone had ever told me that that's what I'd be known for at this point in my career, I don't know whether I would have cringed or just said that's impossible. But I got into digital marketing very, very early in the 90s, and coming out of traditional advertising. And so I was a digital, and I was doing website development and online advertising. And they ended up going to this company that had what it's called dynamic marketing environment was its product. And it was email to landing pages.
Okay.
Was sort of the product. But they didn't think of it. It wasn't until I left there and went to my next company, which was Digital Impact, that I realized it had been an ESP, but it wasn't calling itself an ESP. It was trying to... And so they never went anywhere. I mean, they had a really big client in IBM, but none of us really knew how to talk. It was incredibly hard to sell because email to landing page to dynamic marketing environment, had we said, oh, we're an ESP, I think it would have been a tremendously successful company because the technology was good and it was an on-premise solution. Which is why IBM loved it.
On-prem. Let's pick on that for a second before we continue through the chronology of your career, because you said email plus landing page, and what strikes me is that we're still grappling with the interface between those two things now.
Right.
Like that's the key handoff point. That's what you want the traffic to do most of the time, et cetera, et cetera. And they're still mostly separate things. Your ESP, your marketing cloud, your MarTech, whatever, one solution, your landing pages, website management, all that stuff, another solution. You got this weird gulf between the two of them. Comments?
Yeah, no, it is interesting, and well, and you think back then. I mean, we are talking in 2000, 2000, 2001, 2002. You had plain text emails, so
Right.
you weren't there. There weren't pretty pictures, there weren't anything. It looked like any other email, business email.
Yeah.
So until you got onto a landing page, you didn't really have the option to have any sizzle in it.
Yeah.
And to your point, I mean, that was how another thing. It didn't even occur to us that the email should do the selling. What occurred to us was the email should do the driving to the landing page that did the selling.
Yeah.
And it was funny. And we one of our clients was MasterCard, and we had some very big. Again, IBM used that email platform well into the 2000s because again they wanted something on premise, and we built them an instance of it on premise, and it wasn't until they bought Silverpop.
Right.
Here, kids at home. Here's some history. They bought Silverpop in around 2010. Yeah. It wasn't until then that they actually allowed divisions to send email from software as a service solution.
Yeah. Wow.
But they were still, I think, probably cranking out a lot of it on that thing we set up around 2002, 2003. But so MasterCard was one of our competitors, and so, I mean, was one of our clients, and somebody else in there was this company called Digital Impact. And I wasn't quite sure what they did any more than I was sure what we did at my company. But so I'm looking at, so I see an opportunity at a company, because remember, I'm an agency guy. I started from advertising, and I see an ad or posting for a job to run the New York office of Digital Impact. They were expanding it, and they were looking for sort of an agency mindset that, they wanted people that, with the service-oriented approach, that were comfortable with creative, comfortable with. So I said, that sounds really good. Oh, and that's that company that's been at MasterCard that's been taking business from us. Sounds like a good opportunity. So that's the first time I actually took a job where I knowingly said, I'm doing email marketing. And then Axiom bought them 5 months later.
Oh, that's how you landed. I knew you were at Axiom. I wasn't sure what the path was to Axiom. Okay.
Yeah, that was the first wave of consolidations. I mean, all the MSPs were buying ESPs. That was the time when Cheetah was bought by Experian, Bigfoot was bought by Epsilon, Hart Hanks even bought somebody, Merkle bought somebody.
Oh, wow.
And Axiom bought Digital Impact, and Infogroup bought YesMail. And suddenly all the top ESPs of the time were now part of these huge global companies, database companies that no one had ever heard of outside of the industry. But
right. Interesting. And then Axiom, like that's a big scale operation. At least it was when you were there, for sure.
Oh, I loved it. I loved working for Charles Morgan. I had some of the best years of my career were working at Axiom, and I got some unbelievably great opportunities. Eventually I built their global agency services team. I helped them make acquisitions in Australia for the email team. Wow. I traveled the globe on their behalf, built out our office in Singapore, expanded into Poland for campaign production. So it was a great learning experience. It was a fantastic company back in the day. And, some of the best people and many of them are in the diaspora many of the people that worked with me and for me back then are not at Axiom, because unfortunately they are out of the email business now, but are still playing major roles in the email industry at various companies around the globe. And so, again, I have a lot of good memories about my time there.
One of the things that always strikes me about email, email as an industry, which we're talking about, is that everyone outside China, everyone uses their email, but the whole infrastructure and ecosystem of companies and services and providers involved in getting something, in my inbox on a regular basis, it's like it's landscape. If you don't do this for a living, it's like, it must be a machine somewhere doing that, and they have no idea how vast it is and how complicated it is. Wow. And you got a chance to see that kind of around the world, as you were saying at Axiom.
Yeah, and you're right. I mean, the core companies, and then the the environment, the companies that are in the same space doing other things. I mean, email, I started saying this about, God, that's when you realize how old you are. I started saying this about 12 years ago that from my perspective, again, having been in the digital industry since the earliest day, I mean, I built, when I worked for Think New Ideas back in the day, run by Adam Curry, who was a guest on our podcast.
The
and
MTV
again, Kids
guy.
at Home. Adam Curry used to be an MTV VJ.
Yes.
And is now the Podfather. He's the guy who invented podcasting. We wouldn't be here. Adam Curry actually was the guy who really came up with the podcast concept. And the name Pod even came from the iPod. That was the Apple device. So again, a little bit of podcasting history.
Wow.
But anyway, when I was at Think New Ideas, we actually, we were building the first websites brands like Heinz ever had, or Avon ever had.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's how far back, I go. And what I really saw happening was, and identified it sort of like 2008, 2009, was that up until that time, a company's sort of digital universe revolved around its website.
Mm-hmm.
And everything sort of went to support the website. But I really thought that there was a shift around 2008, 2009, where suddenly actually the email program became the center of the digital universe for companies, and the website just being one of the things that supported email marketing. It was where you went when you clicked on a link on an email. It was providing data back to the email or the ESP to make, for making custom emails. It was a source of massive data, and I still believe that email is the center of the digital universe for a lot of organizations, or at least for the ones that are most successful, that recognize that. Right. Again, it doesn't mean you can't have an email program without a website, but nor can you have a website really without an email program. If you think about it, you can't do that any longer. So, we could argue all day whether I was right or wrong about what's the center of the universe, but the importance of email, to digital marketing and to marketing in general has consistently been underestimated, but shouldn't be and can't be, because it's the pillar.
Well, and at least partial validation of your thesis, and it's really interesting. I didn't realize the shift was that relatively late, 2008, 2009, as you said. But if you've got a company that's looking to acquire another company, the value put on their website is a shadow of the value put on their email list. Usually.
Yeah, that's a great observation. I'm going to steal that.
Yeah.
You're right.
And websites come and go because they're not people, customers, prospects, relationships. It's just, it's pages and technology. And the value of the email really is that, is that relationship recognition, mutual history that you're building up with the people.
And the permission, right? I mean,
and
you're right. I mean,
big deal.
Your email list is an asset that towers over anything else you've got in your digital quiver. I mean, as you said, website. Nobody's buying a company because they got a good looking website.
The first thing you could do is throw it away. As a matter of fact.
Exactly. Yeah, because you're gonna have to rebrand it.
You're gonna have to rebrand it anyway. And pages don't fit. And, we don't talk about it that way. And changes the terms and all that stuff. And I think of the number of times I've redone company websites with, it's like doesn't look the same. A website is a process. It's not a product, because it's never done.
Good point. Right. It sort of never ends. I mean, yeah. Once you put up a website, it's a work in progress. The job's never done.
Yeah. Not completely never done. Now you've got a particular breadth in terms of view on this, because in addition to being sort of inside the beast at Axiom, then you moved on into the research space, correct? After that?
Yeah. Well,
talk about that a bit.
David Daniels had been, again, historical here. He'd been really one of the first email analysts in he had started at Jupiter. Again, that goes way back, Jupiter. I mean, I remember when the reports were delivered on paper.
Yes.
And I had 3-ring binders with Jupiter reports, for gosh sake. And David had been one of the early analysts at Jupiter. And then they got bought by Forrester, and he became sort of their email analyst guy. Mm-hmm. And was the guy and knew more about the landscape than anybody around by far. And Axiom, my boss there, Tim Souther, was putting on a series of client events, and they had me as the inside guy giving this presentation to clients on my views of digital marketing, and they brought in David as sort of the outside speaker, and everyone knew David Daniels, so he was a draw to clients that didn't know Chris Marriott at Axiom. And so David and I got to know each other over several events. And so when I left Axiom around 2011, I approached David and said, and he by then he'd left Forrester and started a company called the Relevancy Group, which was a real boutique consultancy analyst. But he worked with all the vendors. He was still working. There was probably not a vendor that of any size that wasn't a client of his.
Okay.
We like from A to Z. What do we say from Adobe to Zeta?
Data.
and everybody in between.
Right.
And I went to him and I said, because this idea had been brewing in my mind, because I'd seen email, I'd seen the RFP process steadily evolve while I was at Axiom. In the early days, it was like, we're doing an RFP because we think we're paying too much and we hate our vendor. And so my response was, you'll love my team and I'll cut your costs. And that's how you won business. And over time, though, that selection process became a little bit more complex than, can you cut my costs and do you have a better team? And the platforms became more complex, and the decision-making process became harder. And for brands to keep up with, again, you had new players coming in like ExactTarget and Responses. So the vendor landscape was expanding. And I just saw clients begin to really, it became impossible for them to sort of make an objective decision about which ESP to pick. It was luck if they got the right one, just because they didn't have the tools to evaluate.
Right.
And so I went to David and said, listen, you know more about platforms than anybody on the planet. Right now your business is really on the vendor side. I think there's an opportunity here to create another side of your business where we go to where we offer brands the opportunity to hire us to help them run their RFPs, a vendor selection consultancy, and help them, give them the tools. I said, David, we don't want to be Forrester and tell them who to pick. We want to be Relevancy Group that gives them the tools and the advice and the process so that they can come to the conclusion as to who would be the best partner for them.
So in contrast, let's say to a Forrester or Gartner is trying to make an absolute determination of who goes in the upper right and who goes in the middle. Your job there is to say, who's the upper right for your particular business and circumstances and program.
Exactly, Matt. That's exactly right. I mean, we did our relevancy ring for a couple of years where we were kind of doing that.
You got to do that.
Then we realized that relevancy ring, that was our magic quadrant.
Yeah.
But we realized exactly that there really isn't a best vendor. There's a best vendor for you, the brand.
Yeah.
And then our process was designed to get to that point. And
nice.
And once we stopped even trying to stack rank the vendors ourselves, that process really could blossom, because if you bring Forrester, I think works on some RFP processes, but if you hire Forrester to give you advice in vendor selection, they have to recommend somebody who finished in their top category.
Yeah, where's your
otherwise they're delegitimizing their entire process. Going in with Forrester, they're gonna tell you to pick one of the top 6. Well, maybe one of the top 6 isn't the right one for you, but that's what you're going to be limited to. And
or maybe there's a new guy who hasn't had time or frankly the budget to get into the top 6, which is not an inexpensive proposition, especially
exactly.
Right.
We could do a whole half hour on that, but we'd probably get in a little bit of trouble too.
Don't get me wrong, I love Gartner's reports. Although they don't cover the email space. From what
they never. No, back in the day, it was like Forrester was for marketers, the CMO, and Gartner was for the CTO.
Yeah,
and I still think that's true to a large degree.
Yeah, I think so. I think so as well. And I do learn from Forrester's coverage in the email marketing sector when I get a chance to read it. So still value there. So it sounds like. Go ahead.
I don't mean to interrupt you, but I mean, here's karma or timing is everything. Or while David and I are discussing this, and he thinks it's a good idea, and we're talking about the logistics, he gets an email from Ryan Deutsch at Sears Holdings, who says, "We're going to do an RFP. Wow. Do you know anybody who can assist us in it?"
Wow.
And I knew Ryan very well as well. Ryan and I were friends, though he didn't know that I was talking to David about this. And it was like, not only do we have a client, but it's Sears, Kmart, Land's End, all in one, doing a massive RFP.
Yeah.
And that's when we kicked off the business.
Oh, wow. Nice way to start, huh?
Yeah. I mean, but it was, the timing of just, sometimes you just shake your head and go, how does it work out just so cleanly?
Now, I mean, RFP, that's a very particular kind of consultative expertise. Can you? I mean, which you've got. I think you've used the king of RFPs to be blunt in this space.
Yeah, it's a niche. It's a niche, all right.
Well, because you have to have knowledge and the ability to learn on both sides of that equation, don't you?
Yeah. Well, you have to know. You have to know the vendors. Inside and out. And, fortunately over the years, even when David and I split the company on very good terms, by then I had gotten to know the vendors as well. And I thank David, for getting me into the vendor world. I wouldn't have my business today without David Daniels, having worked with him over about 4 years of time.
Nice.
But you also have to know how to run an RFP. You're right. I mean, you have to know what are the steps that you need to take? How do you go from 8 to 4 to 2 to 1?
Yeah.
You also have to know how to negotiate a good deal. You have to know what, and that was one of the interesting things when we started this. I never, I thought the benefit was, hey, RFPs are a lot of work. And sometimes you make the wrong decision. Let us come in. We'll do, we have project managers that'll run it for you. And we'll manage the blocking and tackling of it. We'll bring expertise and we'll help you, give you the tools to make sure that you make a very informed decision.
Right.
But we also realized, or I realized after a couple of years, that we had seen probably more pricing information.
Oh, right.
Than a procurement person at any major brand sees in a career over for email marketing. Sure. That we really had a bet, because we were there until the very bitter end. We not only got the pitch pricing, but we got the deal pricing.
Right.
And I realized then that we could guarantee brands the best possible pricing, because not only did we know where the bottom was in terms of pricing, the vendors knew we knew that.
Yeah.
So there was you didn't have to do the dance.
Yeah.
And so over time, I really found that that the know you're getting the best price possible when you work with us became a very compelling part of our pitch. I have 10 years of data. We track. I have an Excel guru, and we've just tracked all these different, services costs, CPM costs, migration costs, and it's really an interesting, look at how pricing has evolved, both in terms of where it's decreased, but where vendors have gotten, cagey, how they've dealt with declining CPMs by adding new costs that didn't exist before.
Right. And you said on a call, I think a couple of weeks ago that I happened to be on, that straight CPM pricing is not necessarily the deciding factor these days.
No, pricing, I think pricing in general, it is not a huge determining factor. Most of the ESPs will kind of be in the same, at least in our RFPs, because again, I think we know pricing. So, we don't even look for pricing until we get to the final four. I tell our clients,
okay, interesting.
We're not going to do a cut down based solely on pricing. Let's do the first cut down based on who best fits your requirements.
Yeah.
Then we'll look at pricing.
Okay.
And so we look at pricing when we get to the final four. And, I think I said on the call, there hasn't been a single RFP we've managed where pricing was the driving fact. And of course, it's important, and of course, we get our clients good pricing, but I have to hand it to our clients. They've all made the decision based on what platform best met their needs, and trusted us to get them the pricing that they deserved.
Right.
And it hasn't been successful. I'm not aware of any of our clients having moved platforms since going back 8-9 years. They're still. I think there's one that changed platforms, and I think that was because the typical new people came in and wanted to look around. But I was talking to a vendor president today, and we were talking about, and I won't name it, but he said, you might want to reach out to retailer XYZ, because I hear they're doing an RFP. And I said, well, didn't they just do an RFP? And he said, yeah, but 3 years ago, but apparently it didn't stick. And he said to me, what you need to do is reach out to them and say, you're going to pick them the vendor for the next 10 years, not not someone who's going to be, for one contract cycle. And and that was, I said, that's a great pitch. Thank you.
Pitch.
But
really good
as I thought about it, it's true. Again, our clients don't regret their decision, because it's been an incredibly thoughtful process that they've done all the way through to the sandbox, and so they really know they're picking the right partner, and again, they in our cases, we've been lucky that they all have been very happy with their choices.
You must have to force their hands, at least in many cases, to actually be crisp about their own needs and requirements, not just vendor comparisons.
Yeah, well, and part of what we do is, I say we're not order takers. We don't just go in and say, what do you want?
Right.
Because again, I don't expect the brands to know what they don't know, and what's changed in the marketplace, and what new features and functionality are available to them. So, we try to tease out of them, what ifs. What if you could do this? What if you could do that? And brands brands see the value in that. And then the way our process works, without going into boring detail, is we'll set up the requirements. Our RFPs are very simple Excel spreadsheet requirements lists and use cases. They're not colorful brochures and we don't want colorful brochures from the vendors either. We say, no, anything you attach to this, we're not going to look at, and our clients aren't going to look at. But we'll get those requirements documents back, 250, 350. And then we lay each vendor response side by side, the requirement and 8 vendor responses side by side.
Wow.
And our clients and we go through and score each and every requirement in each and every vendor response. And is it backbreaking? Yes. Is it painful and tedious? Yes. But it's the only way you can compare vendors.
Pretty darn objective.
Because you so many times you'll read one response, and then you'll read another vendor's response. And even if the RFP is written well, you don't remember what that vendor said compared to this vendor. Our process forces you to look at each and every vendor answer to each and every vendor requirement, and score them not only how well they meet the requirement, but how well they do it against the other vendors.
Right. So you really do end up comparing everyone on the same terms, which is no mean feat.
And same thing with our pricing. We learned early on. We were driven crazy by when we'd ask vendors for pricing, they'd all have different pricing sheets and formats, and it was very opaque, trying to figure out what they cost. So we said, screw this. We created our own we call it the common pricing template, and we have every possible thing that we've seen vendors charge for.
Wow.
And we say, put your pricing in here, and then we lay those side by side, and roll them up over what it would look like over 3 years, 2 years, 1 year, and vendors can toggle the number of FTEs they think they might need, because again, we just say, what are your hourly rates? I don't want to know how many hours you think the client needs, because nobody can know that at this point in pricing. Just tell me what your hourly rates are,
sure,
and we'll toggle them. And we'll toggle the email volume.
Right.
But so our clients again get a very good snapshot of them side by side, and you really know excuse me, they can tell who's the most expensive, who's the least expensive. And, and we do that mainly at that point, even just to say, is somebody so expensive that we ought to just drop them out of the competition?
Yeah.
That's never happened. Usually it's the other way around. Somebody's so cheap that we go, oh, are they trying to buy share? That always makes me nervous.
Yeah, you gotta watch that.
Yeah.
So with a common pricing matrix, like you said, sinus infection.
Yeah.
That's no fun. That's got to evolve as well. I'm wondering if you can talk to how you've seen the space change in the period of time you've been doing this. Like what's been new, and what do you think it's coming that marketers are going to care about?
In terms of pricing or in terms of features and functionality?
Features, functionality, doing the job.
Well, it's really interesting. I did as you know, I did some research with the Only Influencers organization, and it reaffirmed what I know, which is brands care about what it's like to use the platform itself. Mm-hmm. They care about how easy it is, how intuitive it is.
Mm-hmm.
But they don't want easy. They don't want cheap and cheerful. They want complex but easy.
Yeah.
They want to be able to do complex reporting, mm-hmm. and business analytics, mm-hmm. and segmentation, but they want it to be easy to do. And I don't blame them. Of course, they want it to be easy to do. So there's been a disconnect, and there continues to be, because vendors often tend to talk over the heads of the decision makers.
Yeah.
At the ESPs, they tend to say the things that the CMO and CEO might be interested in, mm-hmm. but they're not involved in any sort of ESP vendor selection process at any sort of enterprise company. They're not even near it.
Right.
And the things that matter again to the day-to-day people who are making the decision, again, there's no, all of the things that vendors got really excited about. The example I always like to use is, display retargeting of email openers. We'll drop a cookie, and then when we show up on the web, we'll give a display ad. Vendors were so excited about that. Brands couldn't have cared less about that, because in their minds, if somebody opens an email and I want to retarget them, I'll retarget them with another email. Why would I take my budget, put it into display advertising? That's another team.
Yeah.
And, that's just one example of how vendors, again, overshoot their target. Mm-hmm. And so, your question was, what do I see coming down the road? I see, improvements in one of the other evolutions I've seen in the course of working RFPs is, 10 years ago, we were talking to the email team, and the mobile team was a different team, and the social team was a different team.
Okay.
And now, once apps became a big thing, the mobile teams were like, SMS, no, too boring. Here, email team,
you guys,
you do out, you take care of that.
Yeah.
And so what I've seen is that email marketers, and we still, brands still think of them as ESPs. I still think of them as ESPs. Vendors run from that label for reasons I don't quite understand, other than they want to talk over the email people, even though it's still email. But what I've seen is the email teams have become, really the masters of all sort of outbound communication, one-to-one communications, or one-to-many communications. Yeah. So they're doing email, they're doing SMS, they're doing push to mobile. And so what they're looking for these days are making that, they like all those things to be native in the platform. Mm-hmm. If they can avoid having a third-party integration for some of that, they like that. Yeah. They want one interface to set up campaigns. They want one interface for reporting. And again, these are bread and butter things, but they're not available on every platform, and they're things that brands want.
Oh, interesting. And I'm assuming that they'd like that to be coherent when it comes down to this customer. You should know what you've sent me and what you've sent Chris.
Right.
In terms of communication. Don't give me 50 different buckets to try to figure that out, so that I can continue to be more effective at that communication.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, they want it easy to do the right message to the right person at the right time, and that's a cliche, but that's what they're looking for. They're not saying, I'm not hearing a lot of, gosh, if we could only do this thing that no ESP can do. They're not saying that. It's making them more effective at what they know they should be doing and need to be doing. Are those the ESPs that deliver that, are the ESPs that are winning these days?
Oh, interesting. Okay. So it's ease of use, but not just in the surface sense. It's in a prolonged. No, I'm going to live with this. I'm going to live with this set of capabilities and tools to do my job over X number of years. So it's really got to fit that as well as possible.
Yeah, I want a future proof. I want an ESP that's going to future proof me.
Yeah.
And so part of that, it means so that the cool stuff that does come up down the road, I know my ESP is going to be investing and make that available.
Mm-hmm.
And that I'm not on a platform where investment stopped 3 years ago when they got acquired by this company. And we won't mention any names.
We won't mention any names. No.
We won't mention any names. But, well, we can mention one name, which is Bronto, because...
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that. Yeah.
We got thousands of clients on Bronto that this week learned, and I don't know when this is going to air, but this week being the first week of March, learned that Oracle's going to sunset the platform in a year. And they either have to migrate to an Oracle's enterprise platform and Bronto's mid-market or lower mid-market. And so they have the choice, Oracle said, you can either migrate to our enterprise platform responses or I guess you'll have to go elsewhere.
Or I guess you'll have to go elsewhere, yeah.
And that's a direct result. I mean, Bronto sort of came along with Bronto got bought by NetSuite back in, couldn't tell you what year, but, and Oracle acquired NetSuite. Right. And Bronto sort of came along for the ride. And what happened is that Bronto's investment stopped that day.
Yeah.
And that was 4 or 5 years ago when that acquisition was made. And, and unfortunately now the Bronto customers are learning, what happens often, not every time, often when a platform gets acquired. And
especially if it's acquired by a big company with a whole lot of other irons in the fire, those other irons being more profitable, they're likely to ignore it.
No, that's a great point. I mean, right. The Bronto revenue stream had to be almost, imperceptible to Oracle, to the management of Oracle and the CFO. I mean, whether that's there or disappeared tomorrow, is not something that's going to, be hugely noticeable to the company, and certainly isn't going to panic Wall Street, because it just isn't enough revenue for a company like Oracle to care that much about.
And cost of keeping it alive. And then by contrast, and you touched on this when you mentioned Lauren McDonald earlier. By contrast, you've seen acquisitions where it doesn't work, or it looks like it'll be better on its own again. So IBM had acquired Silverpop and then turned around about a decade later, correct? And said, you're out on your own as Acoustic, bye, see ya.
Yeah, right. And you have Silverpop clients who literally, have had where Silverpop, they were with Silverpop, then they were with IBM, now they're with Acoustic. And again, I don't want to single anybody out, so I won't, but I will say, and this is something that I've written about extensively, and so it's not new news to people who those one or two people read what I post online, is that none of these acquisitions and mergers ever have really the customer's benefit behind it. They're not done, and the customers rarely do end up benefit. Whoever's on the platform, they rarely benefit from these acquisitions, and oftentimes it's the exact opposite. Things get worse for them, and so you have to look at it and say, well, why are these companies doing this? Well, there's and it all comes down to the fact that MarTech's really hot, and
good point.
There's a boatload, a boatload of money. A former boss of mine at one point said, Chris, you really ought to get into ad tech. You email MarTech. Glad I didn't.
Glad you didn't.
Glad I didn't. You know who you are if you're listening. You know who you are, and you got to agree. I was right because I didn't agree with you then, and there's MarTech is hugely, for some of the reasons we've discussed. Like you said, your list is an asset. It's permission-based marketing.
Yeah.
Ad tech was completely dependent on violating what are becoming the new privacy law norms.
Couldn't have said it
And
better. Yeah, couldn't have
the
said it
ad
better.
tech, the entire ad tech industry is on the verge of collapse. And Google this week, again, not sure when this is airing, first week of March, announced that when they stop doing third party cookies, they're not replacing it with anything else that would basically they don't want any of that type of targeting done throughout their ecosystem.
Yeah. Which I actually did I don't know if you've read it yet. I did a ridiculously long post for OI on their blog about Apple's shift away from the IDFA identifier, or sorry, the requirement for apps to ask permission, and then about Google's impending change in terms of cookie handling. And what really strikes me about that, and then we're getting way the heck off of email, but I'll bring it
Yeah,
back
we
in a
are.
second. Google can afford to do that. Small ad network X is their host. You shut down the third party cookies on Chrome, and they just lost their ability to be accurate. Google's got so darn much data that they think,
Right.
judging from their announcements, they think they'll be able to be accurate enough to be better without violating that sense of privacy and that one-to-one thing that third party cookies enabled.
Right.
Is
Yeah. It'll,
email and permission going to rise in value in the face of these changes in the ad tech space?
I think in perceived value, I mean, I don't think, and maybe it'll get more budget. I mean, it should, but I mean, it's so valuable now. There isn't a lot of headroom for email to go up in terms of the value it's delivering to brands, that do it well. But in reality, your question was sort of, will money go from ad tech to CRM and absolutely, and
Okay.
and I think brands will chase, and I think brands should be chasing. I said this. I wrote this. I don't know, a year or two ago, but I said, email subscribers have a funny way of becoming customers. Brands should be chasing email subscribers.
Yeah.
Brands should be chasing email subscribers because now you have permission to market to them, and they're going to buy stuff.
Yeah. And they're gonna stick around even if they don't buy stuff this month. If you continue to be interesting, relevant, and stay in touch with them, you know what? Hey, 3 months from now, oh yeah, I did want to, and you're the guy I think of. That slot in their head is very, very, very hard to earn. And one of the one of the best ways to earn it is probably email. I'm just curious what your reaction is though, because it does strike me as I've talked to lots and lots of folks in the email space that the value and valuation of email lists and the email programs up here, and at the same time, it always seems like the guys doing that work are overworked, undergunned, underbudgeted, low status. Like it's a funny conundrum to me that they seem like the guys shoveling coal down in the Titanic. They're certainly not up on the deck. Comments?
Well, and I think it depends upon the company. I mean, we've worked with a lot of major brands, and the email team is respected and has a lot of influence in the organization. And those are the ones that are successful with email. I think the problem at brands more is, emails marketing is a stepping stone up the marketing ladder in an organization. And so people, we tend on the vendor side to I mean, we've been around for a long time, and we know what's going on, and we know, what the ABCs of email marketing. I think the challenge is that brands are constantly recycling those people, and that's part of the reason why. And that may be, something that brands need to rethink and say, it maybe it's not a stepping stone, but it's an end goal. Everybody wants to produce TV commercials. Everybody wants to do that kind of stuff. But what's bringing in the bacon? It might be the email marketing. So maybe some brands need to rethink at least how they cycle people so quickly through their email marketing.
Well, it's also, and I think it's parts of the nature of the complexity of the skill set required. But email marketing is not engineering, is not board certified surgery, is not. It's very nebulous as a job and career track in terms of what you need to know, and what you need to be able to do. People fall backwards into it. They learn it. And then, as you said, many of them move on. Certainly a sector that suffers from too much gray hair and not enough youth. But it's also, where do I go from here? Because there's not a really clear track if you don't want to be pounding out, hitting the send button, so to speak, at 11 o'clock at night. Where do you go from here? And the answer seems to be exit. Don't do it anymore, all too often.
Or move up the ladder to what's perceived as more higher value marketing.
Right.
And and I think I think you said something very. I mean, I still think email marketing, the lack of respect it gets is results in, as you say, a lot of people falling backward into it. I mean, I don't know how many people would graduate from college saying, I want to be in email marketing.
Yeah.
I just, there are probably some, God bless you, and you're welcome. We want you in the industry, particularly if you want to be in email marketing. But a lot of people just sort of end up there because it's the job they got.
Yeah. And it's also a job with a requirement for a mix of communication skills, organization skills, and technical skills that aren't necessarily, it's not necessarily an easy mix to find. People who have it may end up in the job, but it's tough to go out and headhunt for someone who's got that diversity, I think, of skill sets and mindsets.
Yeah, one of the things that made my Axiom team so strong, and it was a great team. And in fact, when Zeta bought Axiom Impact team, that was the remnants of my team, and so some of those people are now helping Zeta and are still rock stars. But what I found very early on was, we hired people right out of school. Mm-hmm. That was the days where it was still full service, where brands didn't really use the tools. They sent over the assets.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And the ESPs programmed them, cut them up, put them into the platform, did all the targeting.
Yeah.
And we had two roles. One role that was very technical, that had to know HTML.
Yeah.
And another role that was more technical than I was even, which had to be able to at least use this highly complex tool. Mm-hmm. And able to, do the segmentation and the targeting and the pulling the reports and that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. The people who came up from that, the people that came up through our organization into the higher level client service roles, mm-hmm. were on average way stronger than people we would hire in from outside who hadn't grown up with a tool. And part of the reason is, to your point, I mean, they knew what tools could do, they knew what possibilities were, and they'd learned enough about email marketing that they could also advise clients. Because as you moved up in my service organization, you weren't using the tool anymore. But the smart ones were still using the tool. They could do a segmentation in a pinch or
Well, and they understood how it was done, even if they were doing it, that's a very big deal.
Yeah,
you're if you're managing a set of folks and you say do X and you don't know how X is ever done, you're not going to make the right ask all the time.
You know what? And it's interesting. I hadn't thought of this before, but part of what the industry now is missing is the platforms have gotten so self-service that the people that I used to hire at Axiom to work the tool that became great client service and email strategists as they moved up, they don't exist at the vendor side anymore because vendors aren't hiring people to run the tools on behalf of their clients. Right. The people that used to come work at Axiom are now going to work at brands instead. They're using the tools, and as you and I have been saying for the last few minutes, but they're only doing it for a couple of years, and now they're lost. Now they're lost in email marketing, and that's probably too bad. That is too bad.
Yeah, I mean, it also is what it is.
It is what it is.
Hey, that may be one of the things that takes a shift as we revisit the ad tech, martech, privacy balance over the next couple of years. If you can get someone who's fantastic at managing that incredible asset that we talked about early on, your email list, you want to keep them. In fact, you want to keep them doing that if you can, reward them, promote them, whatever it takes to keep them doing that. I'm watching the clock because I've already monopolized almost double the amount of time I asked you to provide. But do you mind doing a speed round with me? because
Sure.
I think I may have stolen this from you guys on the.
You might have, because we have what we call the lightning round.
Lightning round, right?
Round is different.
Okay, here you go. Dogs, cats, both, or neither?
Dogs.
Oh, there you go. Okay, name a favorite place.
Fairhope, Alabama.
Fairhope, Alabama. Never been there. Okay, lunch with any real person, living or dead. Who?
I know it's a speed round. I got to go. Oh my gosh. You.
Someone more interesting than that.
I couldn't. I guess.
Okay, dead guy. Who for lunch?
Winston Churchill.
Ooh, like that choice. Like that.
And he liked to imbibe, so it would be a boozy lunch, which would
have you
read
into the bios of him?
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Like he's quite a
fascinating guy.
Not the nicest man in the world at all times, but holy mackerel.
Yeah.
what an eloquent command of the language. My word.
And he saw what was coming, both with Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union.
Yes, he did. Yeah.
Better than anybody else.
Years ahead of
him. Yeah. And if the people had listened to him, sooner rather than later, we could have maybe avoided a lot of pain.
Yeah. Hey, parting question, and then we'll continue after I hang up on everybody here. I understand you're a musician.
Yeah, but I haven't. I am. I was a music major, in fact, in college, and history, double major, and played in bands, weekend bar bands, almost my entire post-college life up until, not unfortunately, when I got remarried 10 years ago, moved to Chicago, I broke up my last band, and I haven't gotten a new one together here in Chicago. And I probably don't have the time anymore. And frankly, as I was telling somebody recently, if I were in a band, or if I were to start a band now, I want it to be a band that started playing at 7 and ended at 10. My days of setting up at 10 at night, playing until 1, and then because I was a keyboard player. I'm a keyboard player, and I had 3 keyboard. I mean, it was exhausting after playing for 3 hours and having to tear down all the equipment. So, but yes, I am a piano player, and I still love it, and I still play, but just not in a band.
There you go. Well, thanks. That was I'm glad to add that one at the end. I'm going to wrap this up. My guest once again has been Chris Marriott, president and founder of Email Connect. Chris, thanks so much for making the time. It's a fascinating conversation.
I really enjoyed it, Matt.